The Children's Curse. The group of teenagers thought they had found the perfect spot to party, an abandoned cabin in the woods far away from prying eyes and the watchful gaze of their parents. They brought their drinks and their drugs, ready to have a wild and carefree night. But as they entered the cabin, they felt a strange energy in the air. It was as if the cabin was alive, watching them with a malevolent gaze. The teenagers ignored the feeling and began to indulge in their vices, unaware of the ancient curse that lay dormant within the cabin's walls. It began with a whisper, a voice that only they could hear. It called to them, promising them power and pleasure beyond their wildest dream. At first they thought it was just the drugs messing with their heads, but soon the whisper became a shout, and the hallucinations began. The walls of the cabin began to twist and turn, taking on grotesque shapes and colors. The teenagers saw things that defied explanation, creatures with too many eyes and limbs, and shadows that moved on their own. They tried to leave the cabin but found that they were trapped, unable to escape the curse that had been awoken. As the night wore on, the teenagers began to turn on each other. They saw their friends as monsters and they fought and screamed, desperate to break free from the cabin's grip. But it was too late. The curse had claimed them and they were doomed to suffer the same fate as those who had come before them. In the morning, the police found the cabin empty. There was no sign of the teenagers, no trace of what had happened. But those who knew the truth could feel the curse still lingering in the air, waiting for its next victims to awaken it once again. Years went by, and the abandoned cabin, the woods became a place of legend. People would tell stories about the cursed cabin, warning others to stay away from its twisted walls. But some were drawn to the cabin's dark energy, unable to resist the temptation of the unknown. One such person was a woman named Sari, who had heard the stories about the cabin and decided to investigate for herself. She arrived at the cabin late at night, armed with only a flashlight and her curiosity. As she entered the cabin, she felt the same strange energy that the teenagers had felt so many years ago. But unlike them, she was determined to uncover the truth. As she explored the cabin, Sari discovered a hidden room in the basement. Inside the room, she found an old book, bound in human skin and inked with strange symbols. As she began to read the book, she felt the curse take hold of her. The whisper returned, promising her power and knowledge beyond her wildest dreams, and Sari, unable to resist, accepted the curse willingly. But as the curse took over her body, Sari began to regret her decision. She saw visions of the cabin's past, of the children who had died there, and the evil that had claimed them. She realized that she had become the next victim, the latest in a long line of cursed souls. And so, Sari stayed in the cabin, consumed by the curse, forever trapped in its twisted walls. And those who stumbled upon the abandoned cabin in the woods could still hear her whispers, warning them to stay away, lest they suffer the same fate as her. The Dark Whisperer. The cabin in the woods seemed like the perfect getaway for the family of four. They were eager to escape the noise and chaos of the city, to spend some time in nature and reconnect with each other. But as they settled into their new home, they began to hear strange whispers in the dark. At first, they dismissed it as their imaginations playing tricks on them, but as the nights wore on, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, a dark and ominous presence that was always just out of sight. The family tried to ignore it, to convince themselves that it was all in their heads, but it soon became clear that something was seriously wrong with the cabin. Objects began to move on their own, doors slammed shut without warning, and strange marks appeared on the walls. Then one night, the whispers grew so loud that they could no longer be ignored. They sounded like the voices of the dead, calling out from the shadows, beckoning the family to join them in their eternal torment. The family knew they had to act fast if they wanted to uncover the cabin's dark secrets. They began to search for clues, digging through old documents and photographs, trying to piece together the history of the place. What they discovered was more horrifying than they could have ever imagined. The cabin had once been the site of a brutal murder, where a family had been slaughtered by a deranged killer. The whispers in the dark were the ghosts of the dead, trapped in the walls of the cabin and seeking revenge on the living. And that the family knew they had to find a way to free the spirits, to put an end to the haunting once and for all. But the spirits were powerful, and they fought back with all their might. The family was tormented by terrifying visions and unexplained phenomena, driven to the brink of insanity by the horror they faced. In the end, the family was able to uncover the truth about the cabin and lay the spirits to rest, but the experience had left them forever scarred, hunted by the dark whisperer that lurked in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. Despite their victory over the evil spirits that had haunted the cabin, the family could never forget what they had endured. They tried to move on, to leave the horrors of the past behind and start anew, but the memory of the Dark Whisperer stayed with them, haunting their dreams and tormenting their thoughts. As time went on, the family began to notice strange changes in themselves. They grew more withdrawn, more prone to fits of anger and paranoia. They couldn't help but feel that something was still watching them, still waiting in the shadows to claim them for its own. Then, one night, the whispers returned. They were faint at first, barely audible above the creaking of the cabin's old beams, but they grew louder and more insistent until they filled the family's ears with their terrible chorus. The family knew that they couldn't ignore the whispers any longer. They had to confront the Dark Whisperer once and for all, to put an end to its evil once and for all. They armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find and prepared to face the horrors that awaited them. As they entered the cabin, they could feel the weight of the past bearing down on them. The air was thick with the scent of blood and decay, and the whispers seemed to be coming from every direction. But the family was determined to see this through to the end. They followed the whispers to the heart of the cabin, where they found a hidden room that had been sealed off for decades. Inside, they found the source of the haunting, a dark spirit that had been trapped in the cabin for centuries, feeding off the fear and pain of its victims. The family fought with all their might, driving the spirit back with holy water and salt. But the spirit was strong, and it fought back with a terrible fury. The family was pushed to the brink of defeat, but in the end they were able to seal the spirit away once and for all. As they left the cabin, exhausted and bloodied, the family knew that they had finally put the Dark Whisperer to rest, but they also knew that the horrors they had faced would stay with them forever, a reminder of the evil that lurks in the shadows of even the most innocent-looking places. The last remains. It was supposed to be a weekend of fun, an adventure. A group of 5 friends had planned a trip to an abandoned cabin in the woods, eager to explore the wilderness and experience the thrill of the unknown. But as soon as they arrived, they could sense that something was wrong. The cabin was old and decrepit, with broken windows and a leaky roof. The front door creaked ominously as they pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with cobwebs and dust. But despite the eerie atmosphere, the friends laughed nervously and began to explore. They set up camp in the main room, lighting a fire in the hearth and sharing stories. Over a few drinks, as the hours ticked by, the friends became increasingly uneasy. They heard footsteps in the hallway and whispered voices echoing through the walls. But when they investigated, there was no one to be found. It was as if the cabin was alive, and it was watching them. Then, as the clock struck midnight, the ghosts of the cabin's past began to reveal themselves. The friends saw flashes of the gruesome murders that had taken place there years before, when a family had been brutally slaughtered by a deranged killer. The walls were stained with blood, and the air was thick with the stench of death. The friends tried to flee, but the cabin seemed to be holding them captive. They were trapped, surrounded by the ghosts of the dead, and there was no escape. One by one they began to succumb to the madness, driven to the brink of insanity by the horrors they witnessed. As in the end, only one of them made it out alive. He stumbled into the woods, dazed and traumatized, haunted by the memories of his friends' screams and the last remains of the cabin's bloody history. And even as he fled, he could hear the ghost of the dead whispering his name, calling him back to the cabin to join them in eternal torment. Years passed, but the survivor could never forget what happened at the abandoned cabin in the woods. The memory of his friends' deaths haunted him every night, and he could still hear the ghostly whispers in his ear. He tried to move on, to forget about the past and start a new life. But the cabin's dark legacy had left its mark on him, and he knew he could never truly escape. One day, he received a letter in the mail. It was a simple message, with no return address or signature, but the survivor recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from one of his friends who had died in the cabin all those years ago. The letter urged him to return to the cabin, to confront the ghosts of the past and put an end to the haunting once and for all. The survivor knew it was a trap, a cruel trick designed to lure him back into the nightmare. But he couldn't resist the call of the cabin, the last remains of his lost friends. He packed his bags and headed back into the woods, alone and afraid. As he approached the cabin, he could feel the weight of the past bearing down on him, threatening to crush him under its terrible weight. But this time, the survivor was ready. He had come armed with holy water, a crucifix, and a burning determination to finally put an end to the haunting. He stepped through the front door, ready to face the ghost head-on. And for a moment it seemed like he had succeeded. The cabin was quiet, and the ghosts were nowhere to be found. But just as he was about to leave, the survivor heard a faint whisper in his ear. "Welcome back," it said, and he knew that he had been tricked once again. The ghost of the cabin was still alive, still waiting for him to join them in their eternal torment. The survivor tried to run, but it was too late. The cabin had claimed him as its last remains, and he was doomed to haunt its halls forever. The Phantom Hunter. The group of hunters had heard the stories about the abandoned cabin in the woods, but they paid them no heed. They were after the ultimate prize, a rare and elusive buck that had been rumored to roam the forest. As they set up camp in the cabin, they celebrated their good fortune, but as the night wore on, they began to hear strange noises outside the cabin. At first they brushed it off as nothing more than the wind, but as the noises grew louder and more persistent, they realized that something was stalking them. They armed themselves and ventured outside, determined to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows. But as they searched the woods, they found no sign of their attacker. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed it up. As the night wore on, the Phantom Hunter grew bolder. It would appear briefly, taunting the hunters with its presence, only to vanish once more into the shadows. The hunters were growing desperate, their nerves frayed by the phantom's relentless pursuit. Finally, they realized that the phantom was not something that could be killed by bullets or blades. It was a creature of the forest, a being born of nature itself, and so they turned to the only weapon they had left, their wits. Using their knowledge of the forest, they set a trap for the phantom, luring it into a clearing where they had set up a snare. The plan worked, and the phantom was caught. But as they celebrated their victory, they realized that they had only trapped the phantom, not killed it, and they knew that as long as the forest existed, the phantom would always return. And so they left the cabin in the woods, never to return. But the phantom remained, a legend that was whispered about around campfires for generations to come, and the hunters who had faced it would always remember the terror of being hunted by something that couldn't be killed. As the hunters retreated from the forest, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They knew that the phantom was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. Over the years, the hunters would tell and retell this story, each time embellishing it with new details and exaggerations. Some claimed that they had seen the phantom up close, and that its eyes had glowed with an otherworldly light. Others said that they had heard it whispering in their air, beckoning them deeper into the forest. But no matter how the story was told, one thing remained constant: the terror that they had felt that night in the cabin. It was a terror that they could never fully shake, a reminder that there were forces in the world that were beyond their understanding. And so, as the years passed, the cabin in the woods fell into disrepair, its walls slowly rotting away. But the legend of the Phantom Hunter lived on, a warning to all who would dare to venture into the forest after dark. And as the hunters grew old and passed on, their descendants would sometimes catch a glimpse of the phantom in the shadows, a fleeting reminder of the terrors that lurked just beyond the edges of their world. The Wicker Man. The group of hikers had been trekking through the dense woods for hours when they stumbled upon the abandoned cabin. It seemed like the perfect place to take shelter for the night, so they eagerly made their way inside. But as they settled in, they started to feel like they were being watched. They tried to ignore the feeling, chalking it up to their imaginations, but soon they couldn't deny the truth any longer. It wasn't long before they discovered the cabin's horrifying past. They found strange symbols etched into the walls, and old relics of an ancient ritual that had taken place there. The group soon realized that they had stumbled upon the site of an old cult that had worshipped a terrifying deity known as the Wicker Man. As the night wore on, the hikers tried to escape, but they found themselves trapped. The doors and windows were sealed shut, and the cabin seemed to have a life of its own. They could hear strange chanting and singing coming from outside, and they knew that they were being hunted by the cult. The hikers tried to band together and fight back, but the Wicker Man's power was too strong. One by one they were picked off, their bodies added to the twisted ritual that the cult had been performing for centuries. The hikers realized that they had become sacrificial lambs, chosen to appease the Wicker Man's insatiable hunger for human flesh and blood. As the last survivor cowered in a corner, waiting for their inevitable demise, they realized that they had made a fatal mistake. By seeking shelter in the cabin, they had unknowingly stumbled upon a gateway to hell. And now they were paying the ultimate price for their curiosity. The hiker closed their eyes, ready to accept their fate. But then they heard a faint whisper in their The hiker never forgot the horrors they had witnessed in the cabin, and they knew that they would never be the same again. The experience had left a permanent mark on their soul, a reminder of the ancient evils that still lurk in the shadows, waiting to claim unsuspecting victims. Years passed, and the hiker tried to put the traumatic experience behind them. They returned to their normal life, but the memory of the Wicker Man never left them. They became obsessed with learning more about the cult and its twisted rituals, delving into ancient texts and legends to uncover the truth. Eventually, the hiker became an expert on the Wicker Man and its dark history. They gave lectures and wrote books about the cult, warning others of the dangers that lurked in the woods. But even as they shared their knowledge with the world, the hiker knew that the Wicker Man was still out there, waiting for its next victim. One day, the hiker received a mysterious letter inviting them to return to the cabin in the woods. The letter was signed by someone claiming to be a survivor of the cult, someone who knew the hiker's obsession with the Wicker Man. The hiker was hesitant, but their curiosity got the best of them. They knew that this could be their chance to finally put the past to rest. As they arrived at the cabin, the hiker couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The door was unlocked, and they cautiously made their way inside. The cabin was empty, but there was a strange energy in the air. Suddenly, the hiker heard a voice behind them, a voice that they recognized from their nightmares. It was the voice of the Wicker Man, and it was coming from the shadows. The hiker turned around, ready to face their worst fear. But as they did, they saw something that made their blood run cold. It was the survivor, the one who had sent the letter. They were covered in strange symbols and markings, and their eyes were glowing with an otherworldly light. The survivor explained that they had been chosen by the Wicker Man. They were now a vessel for its power. They offered the hiker a choice: join the cult and become a part of something greater, or die like all the others who had crossed their path. The hiker knew that they had to fight back, that they couldn't let the Wicker Man win. They summoned all their knowledge and experience, using it to outsmart the survivor and escape the cabin once again. As they ran through the woods, the hiker realized that they had finally put the past to rest. They had faced their worst fear and emerged victorious, ready to move forward with their life. But as they looked back at the cabin, they knew that the Wicker Man was still out there, waiting for its next victim. The hiker knew that they had to continue their work, warning others of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. The Wicker Man may have been defeated, but its legacy would live on, a reminder of the ancient evils that still haunt the woods.